again. Um,
Yay!
all right. And is it full screen?
It is. It's close. It fills the screen, and there's maybe like 2% at the very bottom of the screen that's dark.
Perfect. Okay, that'll do us.
Awesome, dude. It looks good. I
Thank
love
you.
the.
Yeah, I had a little too much fun with this.
Nice.
It's actually co-opted from something that I did a few years ago, so I think some of the animations might not transfer to Google Slides, but they tried to fix most of the issues.
It looks awesome, man. It looks fantastic. Oh my God. What? Was it one of us?
No, Dot Vidic. She is one of our newest members.
Oh my goodness.
She was having balance problems when I had a meeting at my house last week to learn about auditions and festivals, and she was there and she was having a lot of balance problems. I hope she's okay. She was planning on coming to the meeting today. You know what? I'm gonna run out.
Yeah, we'll check on that.
What did I just do?
Hang tight. You're fine. That's good.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. Like I said, it's a precariously placed.
You look at that. That is so cute.
Wow. That's really dangerous in a parking lot too. Huh.
Yeah, coming to a piano meeting.
Yep. Goodness. Yeah. Well, we'll wait for Cynthia to check up, and
Okay.
then we can get you rolling, Michael.
Excellent.
I see that. Yes, we talk all the time. You know, we're just.
The other night, I called him right back. He didn't answer.
We text almost maybe not every day, but every 2 days we text back and forth. Talking about cooking and Scriabin and Brahms and I've got this as part of the presentation that I might give in January unless I can get my friend Jolt to do a presentation, because if he can do it, then I'm going to give my time to him. He's amazing. But if not, then this presentation that I might be delivering at some universities in the spring is kind of examining like the pathos of composers and their suffering and mental disorders, as much as we know of like addiction, depression, isolation, psychosis, and so Brahms is Asher turned me on to an aspect of Brahms that I thought was very interesting. Like a disorder in that it prevented him from, well, he never really formed intimate relationships, kind of as possibly as a result of his childhood experiences, in the whorehouses and brothels and stuff. But then his music expresses that. So it's like, is it a disorder? So he puts this longing into his music, and I feel like Opus 117, number 3, has the most longing of any Brahms. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I always thought 117 routine in particular is like increasingly wistful as it goes on.
Yeah. Oh, when it's like, oh my goodness, yeah, so good. So I told Asher, dude, you gotta give me a lesson on this piece because I'm not a Brahms expert. But
No, I would love to hear it. I haven't heard it in a long time.
Yeah, I know. I've been working a lot on some Scriabin stuff. I've been talking to Guga about Scriabin, about the poem Tragique, Opus 34, about the two poems, Opus 32, and he doesn't know the first one, but he said he's played the second one. So we've been going back and forth talking about, is it a G sharp or is it a G natural in this place? Two editions disagree. He said,
Yeah.
you have to play G sharp. I was like, well, this one says G.
Yeah, I'm trying to finish this Chopin project so I can do something else. But I think I'm toying with the idea of doing a Schubert list and Schubert list recital. So
let's check and see what happened. Is he going to the hospital?
They don't know. They were given.
Oh no.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And
yeah, exactly.
And every time she calls, her husband accused her head. So multiple.
Yeah, concussions. Goodness.
But it is. It is. It's not for sissy. That's what someone said once. It's so crazy. Well, maybe when I get home. Yeah, she is. She's not old. Sweet as can be. So we just need to keep her in our prayers.
Yeah.
That she'll be okay.
For sure.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I guess it's time to start the meeting.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, I'm excited.
Did what's her name ever try to get on? Because I didn't see a notification that she was trying to enter.
I don't know. I emailed her the link.
Okay. Well, then we'll just.
She hasn't texted me, so I'm assuming she's okay.
Okay. And we're rolling it, so that'll be. It'll be available at some point. So okay. I'll go ahead and announce our presenter. So welcome everybody today to our second presentation of the 2022-2023 season. Today we have a distinguished figure, Dr. Michael Finlay, who is not only an amazing pianist and insightful teacher, but a dear friend of mine for a very long time. Oh my goodness. Memories are like childhood memories together. Were formative times in both of our lives. Our time spent at Interlochen Arts Academy and camp. And so we've had a friendship that has lasted a long time. And I always like to talk about one of the first things that I heard, this presenter play. And I can think of a lot of things that I remember hearing Michael play, like his senior recital, play Beethoven 109. And I mean, that's huge for anybody, but no less certainly a high school senior. And I remember a piece. I don't know, Michael, if you probably don't want to comment on this. Piece that I really liked was his performance of Volkom's 12th etude.
Oh. I almost forgot about that. Yeah, that piece took a couple of years of my life, I think. But
you really killed that one, and you converted me to Volkom. I know not everybody's a fan of Volkom personally, but it had an impact on me. So anyway, some other stuff that Michael's got coming up: an all Chopin album that he has recorded and is in the process of editing. Well, how many sonatas does that have?
The second and third sonata, the Barcarolle, and fourth scherzo.
To that fourth scherzo too. Oh my goodness, he's a braver man than I am. I wouldn't I wouldn't touch that stuff anymore. I guess I've gotten more fearful in age. Anyway, today he's going to give a presentation on a topic that he has learned and been able to communicate very deeply. That is technique and practice injury. So I'm going to turn the floor over to him. Give him a warm welcome first, though. We're so glad to have you here.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Chris, for that amazing introduction. He's right. We go way back. We've known each other for over 20 years, and it's just, first of all, it's just great to see you again. Thanks for inviting me here today. As he said, I am Dr. Michael Finlay, and I'm the founder of Piano Keys Academy here in Chicago, which is a piano studio in the Fine Arts building downtown. And I give seminars and masterclasses in technique and injury prevention. So I devoted a large part of my career to trying to gain an understanding of the biomechanics of piano playing. So I'm excited to share some of what I've gleaned from that research with you here today. So I wanted to talk about some of the most common pianistic injuries, what causes them, and how to prevent them, and then go into some broad principles of piano technique, how we can apply that knowledge at the piano. So, probably comes as no surprise to anyone at this meeting, but injury is unfortunately all too common feature of musical study. Depending on which study you believe, something between 80 to 95% of us undergo some kind of injury during the course of the career. So that's most of us. And I've certainly dealt with my fair share, which is part of what got me interested in this topic. Was I injured myself early in my at my time at the Cleveland Institute of Music. And I really just never wanted that to happen to me again, and I didn't want that to happen to any of my students. So I started learning as much as I could about the topic. So here's a list of famous pianists who were injured, just to make the point that it doesn't matter what heights you ascend to, injury is something that threatens all of us. Leon Fleischer, Byron Janis, Glenn Gould, even Sergei Rachmaninoff is rumored to have some struggles with injury. The source on this is Thomas Mark's a wonderful book, What Every Pianist Needs to Know About the Body, which will be referenced heavily in this talk. I really recommend it as just sort of a place to start with learning about anatomy and learning what a little bit of anatomical knowledge can do for you at the piano. The three categories of injury I want to talk about today are posture-related injuries. So this is chronic pain and tightness in the back, shoulder, and neck due to poor posture at the piano. And then tendonitis, which is what I think many people have struggled with at one point or another. And then neuropathies such as carpal tunnel syndrome, and one that's less talked about but very common among pianists, which is ulnar tunnel syndrome. So at its core, piano technique is a study of movement. So any dance teacher might tell you, I think, I've never taken a dance class, but the most useful way to organize any movement is from the center to the periphery. So I think that's an appropriate way to think about the body in general. The spine is our foundation, and everything else depends on its stability. So when it does its job well, it supports our body weight so the muscles don't have to. So this frees them up to do what they were made to do, which is to allow us to move. One other thing I'll say is that a lot of times when we have trouble technically at the keyboard, the culprit is further back than we think. So moving from the center to the periphery, I think, is a good way to organize any discussion of technique and injury prevention. So the three types of postural issues I'd like to talk about are forward head position, back-oriented sitting and standing, and fixed tight lower body and lack of balance. So let's start with a little bit of an overview of the spine. Hopefully my YouTube video works. Can everyone hear?
The spine is a column of bones that forms the axial skeleton. This framework provides strong, yet flexible support for the trunk of the body, as well as protection for the delicate spinal cord housed within it. The spine consists of 33 vertebrae stacked vertically upon each other. The vertebrae are connected by facet joints at the back of the spine. These joints allow movement between the bones of the spine. The vertebrae are stabilized by ligaments, and most importantly, are separated by an intervertebral disc between each vertebra, which functions as a shock absorber. The vertebrae can be classified into 5 segments. These segments include 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 5 fused sacral vertebrae, and 4 fused coccygeal vertebrae. The spinal cord runs through a canal located at the back of the vertebrae and extends from the brainstem to the lumbar region of the spine. Nerves branch out from the spinal cord, sending messages for movement and body functions to the rest of the body. The anatomical shape of the adult spine also contains 4 basic curvatures. The thoracic and sacral regions are concave anteriorly, while the cervical and lumbar regions are concave posteriorly. This unique shape of the spine allows it to support the weight of the human body.
Okay, so a brief note about those spinal curves and their purpose. The cervical spine comprises the neck and serves to support the weight of the head. So it is in the center of the body. And the thoracic spine attaches the rib cage and participates in housing and protecting our internal organs. So that's why it needs to curve outwards. But the large vertebrae of the lumbar spine do the lion's share of supporting the weight of our torso. So this curves back towards the center. So that's why we have that sort of S shape. And then the purpose of the sacrum is to attach the spine to the pelvis. And then the coccygeal skeleton is a bit of a relic from when we used to have tails. So the point is, when the spine sits in balance, the large vertebrae of the lower torso support the smaller vertebrae that are stacked on top. So going down from the neck, each vertebra is slightly larger than the one before it because it has more weight to support. So it works best when it's stacked with no portion of it overly burdened. So problems arise when we deviate from this natural position. One thing that happens very often, particularly in our cell phone-centric culture, and also as pianists, when we look at our hands, or there are all kinds of reasons for it, is the head will tend to tip forward. So this kind of has a chain reaction. It places strain on the neck muscles. They tend to tense to hold the weight of our head up. And it also places strain on the thoracic spine, which wants to tip forward in order to relieve that tension with the neck muscles. So this places strain on the lumbar spine. And so generally, it places a lot of strain on the muscles of the neck, shoulders, and back, and it can lead to muscular injuries in the back, shoulders, and neck, as well as problems within the spinal column itself. And here's this little diagram showing that the further forward the head is, the more it feels like it weighs. So if you go forward just 15 degrees, the head goes from feeling like about 12 pounds to 32 pounds. And if you go forward another 10 degrees, it feels like it weighs 42 pounds. So the upper traps and back and neck muscles have to contract in order to hold up all that extra weight. And so not only does that cause strain, but it restricts movement because those muscles aren't available to us at the piano if they're holding up our head. So the consequences can be significant. So something besides just the muscular pain is that all of the nerves that serve the whole arm structure originate in the lower cervical and upper thoracic section of the spinal cord. So if you compress that area, it tends to impinge those nerves. So the entire arm structure can be subject to numbness and tingling and restricted movement, and you can have nerve problems as a result of this postural thing. And also, sitting this way leads to chronic musculoskeletal tightness and pain. Those muscles, if they're chronically shortened, they tend to just stay in that shortened state long term and hold us into that shape. All right, so the second postural issue I wanted to talk about is something called back-oriented sitting. So this is this common habit, I think, arises from a misunderstanding of what constitutes good posture. So it comes from mimicking military posture, like chest out, shoulders back. So this is the reason this is not always good is because it feels like something that's put on, that it's work. So the whole idea of having good posture is that the spine needs to do the work to hold up your body so everything else can relax. So even though the part of the spine we can see, the other part is, even though the spine is, the part of the spine that we can see is close to the back, the actual vertebrae are closer to the center of the body than we think. Throwing the weight back puts pressure on the nerve half, the spinal cord half of the spine, which limits movement and risks eventual nerve damage. And then this puts us at risk of low back pain. So if forward head posture is indicated in upper back pain, leaning too far back can be indicated in lower back pain. All right, so the last category of postural injury I want to talk about is just, this kind of goes with the territory of anyone who sits a lot, but a stiff lower body. So when we sit, we often fix the lower body in one position. So we tend to have our right foot on the pedal and our left foot underneath us, and we don't really deviate from that position. And also we're seated, so our hips are flexed, so our hip flexors tend to shorten. So left unchecked, this leads to significant muscle imbalances that eventually lead to low back pain, as I can personally emphatically attest. I've dealt with very bad low back pain for most of my adult life, and my physical therapists tell me that it's all to do with sitting too much. So to correct all of these, we need to think about the good spinal alignment, and I think it helps to have checkpoints. So Thomas Mark talks about what he calls points of balance. So he names the AO joint, which is where the spine meets the head. So it's the top vertebra where it meets the skull. So this is directly in between the ears, behind the uvula. And then there's the lumbar spine, the hip joint, knees, and ankle joint. So when standing, a plumb line should go through all of those points. So you should draw a straight line, and those points should all be lined up on top of each other. So you can kind of scan yourself from head to toe, like to balance the head on top of the spine, for example. You can kind of pretend you're a bobblehead, just to find that where that joint is, and then just try to make sure that the head is balanced on top of the spine, not tips too far forward. And then you want to make sure the shoulders are relaxed, and then find the point in between the shoulders. It should be lined up with that AO joint, and then that should be directly over the hips, directly over the knees, ankles. So when we're sitting, our point of balance are the sit bones. So many people actually sit too far back in back-oriented sitting. So when you're on the bench, if you don't feel those two bony prominences underneath you, try leaning forward a little bit so that you feel those two bones at the base of your pelvis. So the points that you're aligning when you're seated are that AO joint, the shoulder, the lumbar spine, and the base of your support, which are the sit bones. So again, it should just sort of be a straight line. The torso should kind of move as a unit, and the weight should be delivered to the bench through the sit bones. Okay. So one of the best things you can do for your body in general is to take breaks every half hour. So get up and stand up. Stretch your low back, hip flexors, and neck muscles. If you look at the third picture here, this is what we don't do enough of. We spend a lot of time in flexion, flexed forward, and we don't go into extension enough. So whenever you take a break from the piano, look like the third picture, just lean, stretch backwards, and it's going to feel really good, and it'll lengthen the muscles that tend to always be flexed. All right, so let's move on to repetitive stress injuries like tendonitis and carpal and ulnar tunnel syndrome. So between 65 and 80% of musicians suffer from some kind of RSI at some point in their career. And generally speaking, they're caused by overuse, but I prefer to say they are caused by misuse. So poor alignment, excessive force, and co-contraction. We'll get into what that means in a second. And it's not so much, so along the same lines, it's not so much the quantity of movement, but the quality of movement that makes the biggest difference. So a quick refresher on what tendons are. They're the strong rope-like structures that attach muscles to the bones that they move. So it's a little bit like a pulley. So many of the muscles that move the hand and fingers, and especially the wrist, are located in the forearm. And they're attached to the bones of the wrist and fingers by tendons that pass through gaps in the wrist, including the carpal tunnel. So you've got two sets of ropes. You've got flexors, which are extrinsic muscles and tendons on the underside of the arm, and those pull the fingers into a curled position and the wrist down. And then there's another set of ropes that straighten the fingers and pull the wrist up. Those are your extensors. So when the flexors contract, the opposing extensor muscles and tendons lengthen. And the opposite's also true. When the extensors contract, the flexors lengthen. Co-contraction happens when both muscle groups contract at the same time. So you have two sets of flexors pulling against each other. So hyperflexion and hyperextension of the wrist also pull on the opposing tendons and muscle. The mid-range is the healthy range of movement where neither set of muscles or tendons is being pulled upon, so overly taxed. So what happens with tendonitis? What happens with excessive co-contraction or hyperflexion and extension is it causes micro tears in the tendons. And over time, that causes inflammation and limited range of motion. And that's what we know as tendonitis. And tendons don't receive as much blood as muscles, so they heal very slowly. Recovery from tendonitis is a long process for most. Moving on to carpal and ulnar tunnel syndromes. Generally speaking, the wrist is a busy and crowded place. Many tendons, major blood vessels, and 3 important nerves, they all pass through the wrist. And the carpal tunnel is only really the size of your index finger, and 9 tendons and the median nerves pass through it. So you can almost imagine this area as a garden hose. If that garden hose is crimped, that puts pressure on the median nerve. So the definition of carpal tunnel syndrome and ulnar nerve tunnel syndrome is it's a neuropathy that causes numbness, tingling, weakness, and lack of sensation in your hand because of pressure on the median nerve. So the median nerve serves fingers 1 through 3. And then the ulnar nerve, which passes through here, serves fingers 4 and 5. So simply put, the reason we get these conditions is because we put the wrist in awkward positions. So the goal should be to remain as neutral as we can, especially when we move our fingers in repetitive fashion. So the carpal tunnel is already narrow. When you overflex the wrist, you're making that space even smaller. So the pictures, and then the pictures on the right show positions that can lead to problems with the ulnar nerve. So the other thing about keeping a neutral wrist is that when you put your wrist into these flexed or deviated positions, the tendons encounter more friction. And that means that this also risks tendinitis. So basically, we don't want a wrist that's too low or a wrist that's too high or deviated from to one side or the other. We want it to be roughly level with the knuckles like this. All right, so that is the common injury portion. Now let's talk about how to apply some of this knowledge at the piano. For me, it boils down to a few broad principles. So first of all, how we sit is really important. Sitting properly allows us to free the shoulder and keep a neutral wrist and leverage our weight into the piano. Also, it's important for the fingers to be connected to the structures behind them. They're just the endpoint of a kinetic chain originating at the center of the body. And we are sitting on a huge reserve of potential energy if we can learn how to leverage it properly. Alignment and balance are important. Hand and arm must be centered behind the finger that's playing. And the hand should also feel like it's balanced on each finger. Anatomical awareness is important. So we might all differ in size and shape, but we share the same bones, muscles, and nerves. So the more you know about your body, the more equipped you'll be to spot the root causes of your technical problems and stop injuries in their tracks. And then it's also important to be aware of the anatomy of the piano. It's a pretty precise machine, and there's certain things that we can know about it to give ourselves more control over our sound and to take some of the effort out of playing. So I want to talk a little bit about historical approaches to technique, starting with the days of Mozart and Czerny, when the action of the piano was much lighter than the pianos we have today. So writing tended to be less dense with fewer chordal and octave passages, and the action was lighter and shallower. So the action was very finger oriented. The approach to technique was. So there was a focus on individuation of fingers and the separation of their movement from everything behind them. So they talked about active fingers and a quiet arm. People would practice lifting their fingers high to systematically separate them from the rest of the assembly. So I think this is a surefire recipe for tendinitis, especially on a modern instrument. Cutting the fingers off from everything behind them means that they have to overwork, and those tendons that we were talking about earlier are worked overtime. Particularly if you follow the advice of lifting your fingers high like this.
Do that again.
So if you, in a curled position, if you lift your fingers high like this, you are flexing by curling and extending by lifting at the same time. So that's two sets of tendons pulling against each other.
We just had the technological limitation of the screen size, so I've got to either increase the picture of you or increase the slide.
Oh, I see. Sorry about that.
It's all good. It's all good.
All right, so here's some actual photos from a treatise on piano technique. So I'd hope that your instincts tell you that these positions look progressively uncomfortable. So let's break down what has to happen to attain these positions. So in the second picture, for example, the finger is lifted by an extensor, but at the same time, it's flexed at that second joint, which is performed by the opposing flexor. So tendons are pulling against each other, and he hasn't even played a note yet. And then in the third image, I'm not really sure what's going on, but I wouldn't recommend anything about it.
Yeah.
All right, so the natural reaction against all of this is a complete 180, which I'll refer to as the arm weight school. So here's a list of famous proponents of arm weight at the piano. So the goal of the arm weight school is to take the fingers out of the equation altogether, or at least to minimize their role. There's a kind of dead dog relaxation of the arm, I like to call it. And the idea is for the arm weight to be what depresses the key. So movements of the fingers are replaced by large rolling movements of the arm to guide the fingers around the keyboard. And the weight is delivered to the keyboard through a high solid bridge, or knuckles. So I think this is an improvement, but I think it's also incomplete. So relaxation is absolutely what we should feel when everything is working well. And there's a reason that we all tell our students they need to relax. But I think we need to be more specific on how to achieve that state of relaxation. I like to use the word freedom just to be a little bit clear on how it should feel. So too much dead weight can cause everything to just feel weighed down, like we're working against our body instead of with it. So it makes the work of playing the piano needlessly taxing. And relaxing the wrong things, if you're relaxing the bone structure, like the arch structure of the hand, for example, it actually forces the muscles to do the work of supporting weight, which we feel as tension. So the muscles are forced to do the work of the bones when we collapse the structure. And then finally, the arm movements required to take the fingers out of the equation completely, which is actually impossible, are needlessly large. So the answer is not either or, it's both and. We need our fingers and we need our arms. So what I advocate is a full body approach to the instrument. Every part of the body has a role to play in playing the piano. So back to the idea of going from the center to the periphery, there needs to be an alignment that goes all the way back to what we're sitting on, our center of gravity. So the finger, hand, and arm need to work together as a unit to take the effort out of playing. The weight of the torso can also be leveraged efficiently to produce large sounds with minimal effort. If I don't have a piano here to demonstrate, but usually I demonstrate Liszt sonata with to show how to do this, but I'll try to explain it as best I can. So our spine sits in a sort of flower pot, the pelvis. And our center of gravity when seated is located in the center of that flower pot. So the center of the body, about 2 inches below the navel. So the lower body is also important for leverage and balance. So for example, if you're trying to get to extremes of the keyboard, it helps to think about what you're doing with your feet. Okay, so basically, we don't want muscles to do the work of the bones. This is an oversimplification, but the job of the bones is to support our weight, and the job of the muscles is to move those bones. And when one link in the alignment chain breaks, muscles tend to pick up the slack. I like this image. It's probably apocryphal, but it's of a Tai Chi master that has the ability to channel so much energy through his finger that he can just gently touch you and knock you over. It's not a perfect image, but when everything is working properly and everything is aligned, it feels like it takes very little effort to make a huge sound. So Yes, proper alignment takes the effort out of playing. So I keep talking about alignment. So what are we supposed to be aligning? Well, going with the idea of going from the center to the periphery, let's give ourselves 5 links of the chain. So we start with the center of gravity, which, as I said, is the center of the pelvis, 2 inches below the belly button. So we're sitting on it. We're sitting on our center of gravity. The weight of our torso is transferred to the bench through the sit bones. So this is our point of departure here. Second, there's the shoulder blade, which is the fulcrum that connects the back of the body to the instrument. And there's the elbow, which should hang naturally from the shoulder joint, which leverages the power of the upper arm and the weight of the torso to the forearm, hand, and finger. And the wrist connects the arm and the hand, and it should be kept neutral to avoid a break in the alignment. And then the knuckle is the last link in the chain. The most ergonomic way to move the finger is at the knuckle joint, using intrinsic muscles of the hand. More on this later. So our center of gravity, our center of mass, if you watch a martial artist, a gymnast, or a high wire walker, you'll notice that they tend to always organize their movements around their center of gravity. So I think balance in general is about always knowing where that point is, where your center is. In a neutral standing position, the center of gravity is where the base of the spine sits in the pelvis. So again, 2 inches below the belly button, center of the body. So notice in these 3 images, the athletes move in such a way that this central point remains constant. All the movements are organized around this central point. So far the talk has been about biomechanics and physics, but I also want to address the reality that music has a tremendous emotional component. So when you feel nervous, where do you feel it in your body?
Stomach.
But well, I also feel it higher though. I usually feel like my pulse might quicken, and then my breathing might get shallower, and I might close down my posture in my upper body. So without a stable lower body, we often feel tension in our upper body. So what that means is that we often feel the emotional content of a passionate piece of music in ways that results in physical tension. I think we've all had the experience of getting to our favorite spot and screwing it up, right? When you get to like the climax of the piece, and right when you're most excited is when you make your mistakes. So if you instead imagine the center of your body as your emotional center, you can feel the music in a way that frees the upper body and to go about the business of playing. So my teacher, Mike Durand in Montreal, had this quote that said, "The heart is for receiving messages and the center is for sending them." So I like this image. It's like you can almost think of it as the music goes through you and you send it out from your center of gravity. And so the idea is you want to open up your your posture as much as possible. And that helps free our upper body to go about the work of playing. All right, so a word about bench height and distance. So in general, I think bench height is very important because it allows the assembly, it allows for the alignment we've been talking about. So if you're sitting too low, the elbow will be below the keyboard, which means the weight of your upper arm doesn't get leveraged properly into the keyboard. The wrist has to flex and the shoulders tend to go up in order to compensate. If we're too high, the upper arm and shoulder will have to support the weight of the forearm, and the wrist might bend backwards to be level with the keyboard. So yeah, so that more on being too low. Shoulders might compensate, impeding freedom of movement and contributing to neck and back pain. Apologies to Glenn Gould. who famously sat about 12 inches off the floor. In either case, weight is inefficiently delivered to the instrument due to breaks in the alignment. So the correct height would be with the elbows level or slightly above the keys. And this distributes the weight of the hand and arm between the fingers. So the elbow should hang naturally from the shoulder joint, and the wrist should remain neutral. And the fingers, as I said, rest comfortably on the keys. So more on bench height. It's determined more on the length of the upper arm than by the height of the pianist. So rule of thumb, we've already said this, but the elbow should be level with the keys or slightly above, which is my preference actually, because that tends to leverage the weight of the forearm into the keys. Distance is also important. So if you're too far, your elbows will extend, reaching for the piano. So your delts, your pecs, and biceps tend to tense to hold up the weight of your arm. And if you're too close, the elbows are thrown behind your body, which puts a strain on the triceps as it approaches the ends of it range of motion, and it removes weight from the keyboard. So if it's just right, the elbows are slightly in front of the shoulders where they hang naturally, and the muscles of the upper arm and shoulders should feel totally free. So I like to implement all of this by practicing with arm impulses, forward impulses of the arm, which when done properly help to unify the actions of the arm, hand, and finger. So this pushing motion connects to the back of the body, giving you leverage to create a lot of sound with minimal effort. I also like to think of playing from the keys up. So this is also known as percussive touch, but I always play everything from the key whenever possible, which gives more control of the sound and economizes motion. There's no sound at the bottom of the key. So what happens during key descent, and I was told by my piano technician that I don't have these measurements quite right, but the point stands. It's about 10 millimeters from surface to keyboard, or to key bed, rather. And in the top portion of key descent, nothing happens. The first thing that happens is the damper is engaged, and then the whip-in and attached assembly is engaged, which pushes the hammer up. And this is the important part. There's a point at around 7 millimeters where the jack slips away from the knuckle. You don't necessarily have to know all the parts of the action to know what this is. It's that bump that you feel on a grand piano. So what happens at that point is the hammer is sent to the string, and that's the point of sound, not the bottom. So all effort beyond that is just the aftertouch, and that actually doesn't contribute anything to the sound. To the extent that it contributes to the sound, it's the noise that the key makes when it hits the key bed, which can actually have a negative impact on your sound. So forcing to the bottom of the key, hitting the piano doesn't give you much control over loud sounds, and it actually compromises your sound quality. And the piano hits you back. You're hitting a piece of wood, and the laws of physics say that all actions have an equal and opposite reaction. So it's physically taxing to force to the bottom of the key. And speed of attack, not gravity, determines loudness. So it's really the speed that the hammer is going when it hits the string that will determine how loud your sound is. So the idea, if you're trying to get a big sound, should be to accelerate that hammer as efficiently as possible. And then, so this is easier demonstrated than explained, but the friction of a forward approach coupled with the longer diagonal line from the key to the point of sound gives a pianist more control over the rate of hammer acceleration. So these are all points in favor of playing forward rather than down. Playing forward also reduces key noise, which improves your quality of sound. If you're trying to find that point of sound, the bump that I was talking about, it helps to practice doubling notes. So if I just practice a passage, da-dum, ba-dum, 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 and because the key doesn't have time to come all the way up, it really zeroes in on that point where the sound is made. All right, so I think I'm almost to the end of my talk. I'm going to kind of zoom through the rest of it so there's time for questions. The last part of the of this assembly is the hand and the finger. So I like to think of a longer finger that includes the metacarpal, which are these yellow bones here, which if you look at it, so the bones of the hand really look like an extension of the fingers. So if you imagine the finger is actually attached to the wrist and you align that with the key, it can take a lot of the effort out of playing, actually, and it can really help you center behind each finger. Problem of the thumb. Ashkenazi was quoted as saying 99% of piano problems come from the thumb. So something I'll say about the thumb is moving it up and down is actually the same movement. It's abduction and adduction, which is the same as sideways movements of the fingers. So it's inefficient and taxing. So I like to think of the thumb as an extension of the arm. And the feeling when the thumb is really free is that the entire inside of the arm feels empty and flabby. If the thumb is tense, the entire inside of the arm feels tense. And if you flex the thumb at the last joint, it just feels like instant tension. So I like to try to keep a straight thumb. So moving the finger as a unit from the knuckle. So our most agile muscles in the hand are the lumbricals, which move our hand like this. And if you look at the second picture, to isolate the movement of the lumbricals, you can kind of make this puppet shape, this duck hand. And I like to think of that as being the primary mover when I'm thinking about the action of the fingers. So if I move the whole finger as a unit and don't really think so much about these last two joints, it just feels much more agile. All right, so here are the three movements to minimize. So curling, which is over curving the fingers. Our teachers weren't wrong. You do need to play with curved fingers, but if you over curl them, then you're overusing the flexors. And then there's radial and ulnar deviation or twisting. We often do this to avoid the black keys. And this is something that can lead to problems with the ulnar nerve and tendonitis. And then there's also stretching. If you spread the fingers, everyone try this. If you spread your fingers and then try to wiggle them, you'll feel that there's immediately a lot of resistance. And then if you hold them closer together and wiggle them, you'll feel the difference right away. So I just summarized all of this information because I'm trying to wrap this up. But so curling, curling, twisting, and stretching are the three categories of movement that I think most often lead to the injuries we talked about in the first part of the talk. So one last thing I wanted to talk about is active versus passive stretching. So if we stretch passively, almost like letting another person stretch our hand, outstretched positions can be attained without as much strain as if we actively spread them. So we can use the piano as our second person to reach large intervals. And finally, there's something called, I call it either three-dimensional stretching or rotational stretching. By tilting the hand, it's possible to take advantage of finger length to navigate stretches. And this is especially useful for things like chords where the second finger plays close to the thumb. All right, so as we said at the outset, injury is too common, and it's incumbent on us as teachers to learn as much about it as we can in order to protect our students and ourselves. I think it's misuse rather than overuse that leads to most injuries. And it's possible to, I think, but that what I mean by that, it's possible to hurt yourself pretty quickly with bad habits. But with good habits, we can actually work for long hours pain-free. And finally, to generalize, many problems can be boiled down to poor posture and unsupported fingers. So thanks so much for hosting me today. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have. Sorry, I went a little over time.
Yeah, that was awesome.
All right, see if I can. Is the camera back on me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right, let's open up the floor for questions. I know I took 4 pages of notes and literally 4 pages of notes. And I didn't even get everything, so I've got a lot of thoughts. But let's turn it over to everybody else.
I really have 2 questions. A lot of us here teach young children, and I don't know if you teach young people and have some different method books, but the Safer and Saver method book talks about the karate pose for the distance of the student from the keyboard. Do you agree with that? You know what I'm talking about?
I didn't hear. I'm having trouble hearing. Can you just repeat the question, Chris?
So yeah, sorry, it's my microphone on here. I forgot to bring another microphone. So yeah, in the Faber method books, specifically when talking about working with young students, there's an emphasis on the karate pose in order to determine that from the piano. Do you agree with that, or want to add anything to it?
That's a great question. Actually, I think that it's a pretty good approximation. It's just that you want to make sure that I think for me, I go with elbow position. If when they return to a normal position, the elbow just is too far in front of their body or too far behind, then I might make an adjustment to the karate pose. But it generally gets you in the right ballpark.
How about the position on the piano bench? You teach young children and they immediately want to pull the piano bench, really far, and so their whole back end is on. So most of us teach that just, excuse me for using these words, just your fanny or just
yeah. Yes. I like, so for that, I mean, I'm constantly just telling people to sit further forward on the bench and then not to my teacher in Montreal had a funny way of putting it. If you were rocking too far back on the pelvis, not on the sit bones, he would say you're sitting in a pot of jello. Yeah, so for me, like for a kid especially, having their feet flat is important, and then sitting on the front part of the bench, I think, gets you.
I'm sorry to ask another question.
Oh yeah.
Children, the first joint sometimes wants to collapse. Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes, we're all familiar with that. So with well, first of all, with kids, there's often also just like a developmental issue where they just haven't quite developed the motor skills and the I don't want to use the word strength, but like there's just not the support in the hand yet. What I have often done, so I use a method. Have you guys heard of Piano Safari?
Yeah.
So I use a combination of that and like there's a couple of Russian methods, the Russian school of piano playing that I use with some older students. But the idea is you start people playing simple rote pieces on one finger. I prefer the third finger because it kind of gets them centering behind each hand. So basically, a collapsing joint is a symptom of a lack of alignment. but it's not always, it's not really the first thing that I try to correct. First, I want to just put their arm with their fingers, and then gradually, as they get to a more advanced place, I encourage the firm fingertip. One trick that I learned is having them practice on an eraser, which just has this effect of just getting them to play on the right part of the finger, which is kind of like where you can feel the bone. And I find that can kind of get them to understand what they need to be doing when you ask them not to collapse. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I struggle with it too with the kids. But those are some of the things that I do.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I was encouraging the children to curve their fingers too much.
I see.
Strength they need to hold them in place. Because if you try that lovely natural hand position, they're just going like that. They just can't do it yet.
Right.
And I wonder if that's, so where do you strike the balance?
That's a great question. Because a lot of this, honestly, a lot of this applies more to like fully formed, mature hands. And while you are developing a younger hand, I think it is important for them to find that that firmness in the fingertip. But I think what I do is I try to get them to find their natural hand shape as much as possible. And I have found that doing these pieces, it's starting with these piano safari pieces that are on one finger. It just helps them achieve that hand shape. And so that when they start playing on more, here's another thing that I like to do is have them play things non-legato. I think that one criticism I have of a lot of methods is they introduce 5-finger positions too quickly and they introduce legato too quickly. I think if you practice non-legato, it helps put your arm with your fingers, and that firmness of the fingertips develops earlier.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, I have a question.
Yes.
You were talking about arm weight,
Mm-hmm.
and if you teach the dead dog method, I love that. That it could be overkill.
Right.
Did I understand that right? So how would you teach arm weight to young children? Because I see them hitting the key, and trying to get them to drop into the keys. But when I hold their arm up, I don't know if you've seen me, but when I hold their arm up like this, and I'll tell them pretend like they're asleep, and I let go, they do this. They go. It's a really hard time. I mean, week after week.
Right. So
to a young child?
I think there's not much. So I think learning to access your arm weight is an important thing to learn how to do. So I don't think it's wrong to teach a student to completely let go of everything in their arm and discover how heavy their arm is. Like I have them pretend their arms are heavy ropes. I have them learn to just sort of drop their arm on the piano. I think the trick comes later if you are constantly just like weighing yourself down as you play. So again, I kind of like to, from the very beginning, be teaching people how to coordinate the movements of their fingers with everything behind them. And so that's why I like the non-legato, which kind of encourages people to use to balance on each finger and to coordinate the movements of the fingers with the hand and forearm. And that's why I like the single finger rote pieces.
So that would
Um,
help them with the arm weight.
yes, it would help them deliver that arm weight more efficiently into the piano. So a lot of the problem is like when everything's just too flabby.
Yeah.
And when that arm weight is just inefficiently leveraged into the keyboard, that tends to cause the fingers to pick up the slack, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Complicated.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Hmm.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Let's have another big round of applause.
Yay!
Thank you very much. It was great.
All right, that was awesome. Thanks again. We're grateful to have heard this presentation. A lot of great information there, and a lot of good engaging questions and answers. So thanks again, and yeah, I guess that's a
Thank
wrap
you
for
so
today.
much.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.